So now we are live. Great. I will just wait for the official confirmation that we are live. Perfect. So hello, everybody. So today we have the pleasure of welcoming Luca Mezzalira, Principal Solution Architect at AWS, who is both international speaker and a book author. In this session, Luca will share his insights from the published book, The Building Micro-frontends, offering a pragmatic and accessible guide to embracing micro-frontends. And alongside this session, Luca will uncover some key lessons and strategies that empower developers to create more maintainable, scalable, and efficient applications while transitioning from monolith towards a more modular and manageable solution. And just before we start, I would like to remind everybody about the questions that we will have after this talk. So please feel free to comment in the comment section in YouTube and let us know what would you like to go deeper in. And here on, Luca, thank you very much for being here with us, and feel free to start. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here. First of all, I'm very excited to talk a bit about my book. And micro-frontends is a topic that I really love. Spent the last 8 years, probably 9 by now, designing, thinking, helping teams, and preaching, let's say, the learnings that I have done, talking with people, seeing how micro-frontends are working inside teams, inside large organization. And I had the pleasure to work with teams worldwide, from Australia to Silicon Valley and everything in the middle, helping them to understand micro-frontends, to design them, reviewing their architecture, helping them to go in production. So it was a really nice journey so far, and I'm not going to stop anytime soon. So today I thought that it would be nice to give you an extract of why we're here, basically, why the book was written back in the days, and talking about micro-frontends and give you and positioning micro-frontends through the years and how they evolved. Because very often, I have people thinking the micro-frontends are still a new thing, but in reality, it's almost 10 years. We are approaching the 10 years mark with micro-frontends. So it's really cool. Okay, so I think you understand who I am. I have done quite a lot of stuff, and currently I'm working in AWS as serverless specialist. I'm trying to merge basically all the knowledge that I have on distributed system, not only on the back end with serverless, but also on the front end with micro-frontends. So everything started in this situation here, and that I'm talking about personally, but it probably it resigned well with you as well, because I think everyone at least once have worked in a three-tier software architecture, right? So if you think about that, what you have here is our classic three layers. We have a database on the top where we store all our data. Usually we select between SQL or NoSQL, depends what we need to address with when we model our data. Then we go in a layer of business logic, where we apply our business logic, we expose our APIs and everything, and then finally we end up with a front-end layer. In this case, this example, for instance, we have a single page application, but could be a server-side rendering approach. It doesn't really matter, right? And still, people think that, oh, and yeah, now in 2024, everything should be distributed. I disagree with that. I believe that still monolithic architecture has a place in this world, and single-page application like a static-side render website or server-side rendering monolith is absolutely fine. There is no problem at all. However, like in the world of the backend, where we move from monolith architecture into microservices, there are certain projects that require a different approach. So remember that at the end, architecture is just expressing specific characteristics that we want to have inside our system, coming from the business requirements to non-functional requirement, or how I prefer to define architecture characteristics, merging them together and shipped into production. Okay, so we have this architecture, and everyone probably has done that at least once. Then suddenly there is the need for scaling out. But what we are looking to scale out? We are scaling out vast majority of the time at the beginning the teams. So we are looking for having more teams in order to let's say have more features deployed, and we need to find a way that will enable our teams to work simultaneously on the same project. And the problem is when you have a monolith, it's not that it's not doable. You express modularity at the code level, and it's absolutely fine doing that. There is no problem at all. However, we realize after a while that there is still a lot of coordination going on, and we want to create the independent. We want to be able to change a portion of the system without touching the rest. We want to make a change without testing the rest of the system. Stuff like that, that basically are usually, let's say, carving out a lot of time for your deployments and for the time to do that. And on the backend side, we have a clear answer that could be microservices. It could be a cell-based architecture or any other, let's say, distributed system that we have explored in recent years. But on the front end, usually what happens is that you continue to go ahead with this monolithic architecture. That's what we have seen in the past very often. And what does it mean? It means that now we have maybe cross-functional teams that have to implement a feature where we have back-end people and front-end people that are working together for delivering this feature. But unfortunately, if the back-end people can deploy their backend independently and how many times they want, the front end, they need to adhere to certain strict rules, to guardrails created by the tech leadership, and rightly so. You want to have like a cohesive code base in order to evolve it and make sure that everyone can touch it. But now suddenly the distributed system doesn't seem so appealing because you still have a bottleneck that is the front end. So what can we do? I was asking myself a few years back. We're talking about 2015. So as you can imagine, quite a long time ago, almost 10 years. And I was in this company called The Zone that I was working, is a live sports streaming platform. Back in the days, I was the second tech person hired there, and people were asking me, okay, so listen, we need to figure out how we are going to scale because we are going to have tens of people, if not hundreds of people inside this organization. And as architect that was looking into that, so okay, on the back end I have an answer, but I don't have an answer for front end. And it was very tricky, that specific situation, because I don't have only to take care about web. I have to take care about smart TVs. I have to take care about set-top boxes or consoles. So I had to really think out of the box. So I started to take the principles of the microservices and apply into Micro-frontend. Obviously, you need to change slightly the way how you should think about that. There are dimensions on the back end that are not present on the front end, and vice versa, by the way. But I came up with this idea that we should do something similar to microservices for front end. At the beginning, there wasn't the name, but we will see that about that in a second. So now, 2015. I remember vividly that during Voxed days, if I remember where it was, Belgrade, I attended a talk by engineers from Zalando. Basically they were talking about this concept of micro apps. I was super curious because I was embarking this journey of distributed system very heavily. And on the back end, yes, I had some experience, but on the front end I was looking for inspiration. And they came up with this idea of creating their e-commerce. So Zalando is a fashion e-commerce. With the framework that was called Tailor.js and a bunch of other tools, as you can see in this slide, where they were, let's say, composing multiple HTML fragments built by different frameworks and shipping as a unique page for the customer. And I found this extremely interesting because it was exactly what I was looking for scaling the organization. That, by the way, we started in tens of people. We ended up with a tech department of 550 people, so quite a large one. And this approach was interesting because every team could build their own solution as long they respect the contract that was HTML fragments. And there was this tailor service that was creating the layout and sending to internet. Great stuff overall. The idea was brilliant. They had to build a lot of tools and to create a nice developer experience. And it wasn't the only company that started that day. There was also OpenTable and others. But that was the first, let's say, exposure that I had around micro-frontends. Everything was done in a server-side that I found at the beginning very interesting. Vast majority of the system were server-side, not many were client-side rendered. And in 2016, finally, in the Tech Radar by ThoughtWorks, if you're not familiar with that, ThoughtWorks twice per year, if I remember well, they share the Tech Radar, that is a white paper or a PDF that you can download, and they share what they have seen with their customers working and not working, or assessing if they found new technology. And here was the first time that the front-end community saw the term micro-frontend. That was quite a milestone, because if you think about that, nowadays is quite normal talking about that, but that was the beginning, and it was quite fascinating, to be honest. A few years later, we started to have the early adopters in 2016, 2017, and 2018. There wasn't much buzz. I, let's say, had the pleasure to talk a lot about these concept micro-frontends, to write in my book, but not only that, I have several articles. If you look into YouTube, you can find a bazillion of talks that I recorded. But more importantly, here we started to have, let's say, the early adopters that consolidate few practices. We have seen some system failing, some others that were succeeding. But in 2019, we started to gather momentum. And that was very interesting for me, because this is a post that I shared on when back in the day it was called Twitter, where I collected a bunch of brands that probably you are familiar with, that all of them, they were back in the days using micro-frontends in some shape or forms. And that was great, because obviously it was clear that the momentum started to move on. But more importantly, if 2019 people started to use them heavily, we will start to have some result and feedback and new ideas coming into the community in a couple of years' time, because this system takes time to build. And in fact, in 2020, year after, we saw micro-frontends into the innovators curve bell of InfoQ. InfoQ, every quarter, they are sharing, let's say, some I would say reports where they collect, let's say, what they have seen in the trenches with different companies, and they try to categorize new trends. If you're not familiar with that, go to infoq.com. You will find a bazillion of interesting stuff over there on top of these things that are categorized by, let's say, topic. Architecture could be, I don't know, ML, machine learning, or artificial intelligence, or it could be DevOps, etc. And it was big pleasure for me, let's say, sharing insight in 2020 about micro-frontends, and it was at the top of the bell curve. Was able to talk at QCon, that is their conference, and it was very interesting overall. But I think there we started to realize, yes, this micro-frontends thing is not something that will pass, it's something to remain. It's talking about architecture, it's not talking about frameworks. So it's a new approach for scaling your system end-to-end. In 2021, I would say we started to see the discovery, that's what I call it. So basically, people started to embrace more into the journey of micro-frontends. They started to take them on board. They started to use it. I've seen way more company intrigued by the concept, and obviously moving from the experience of the early adopters that started to share what was successful, what's not, they started to look into, let's say, process to a mechanism to create that. 2022 was, for me, a very interesting year, and that was like a very rapid adoption. In 2021, I joined AWS, and in 2022, started to be, let's say, bombarded with requests like, Luca, we want, this customer wants you to talk about micro-frontends here, there, and they started to be dragged across the world for discussing about this. And I've seen massive companies from any industry embracing that, from retailers to finance, etc. And nowadays, I would say from 2022 onwards, the adoption starts to be even more broader. And the interesting part of that is that nowadays, every single large organization in the planet, they are looking into that or implementing or even having in production. And I think is a testimony of all the work that we have done since 2015, trying to document and provide approach, provide anti-patterns, provide, let's say, collect what was working, was not, seeing in different contexts the challenges that teams are facing and trying to rationalize them and taking to a next level, to a higher level, where we can say, okay, this is the things that we have seen working. These are things that are not working. Obviously, we have to take them with a pinch of salt, because as usual, you have to think about micro-frontends that is not a silver bullet, is used for expressing certain characteristics inside the system that we are going to see in a second. So we have discussed about the journey. We have discussed about micro-frontends, but let's try to provide context on micro-frontends. So what they are. They are a technical representation of a business subdomain with the independent deployment, and they can have same or different technology. More importantly and more controversially, we will talk about that in a second, they minimize the code share and they are owned by a single team. Those characteristics that I highlighted in this definition that I made back in the days in 2016 are the ones that are, let's say, characterize or creating strong boundaries around the concept of micro-frontends compared to the concept of components. Very often, I have seen, let's say, teams starting to an engagement with me and say, okay, look, we are doing micro-frontends because we are taking this bunch of components, we are loading at runtime. And that was the perfect recipe for failure. And I advocated very hardly that we look into the problem from a business perspective, even looking into domain-driven design if needed. But we need to look into something that is independent deployable. That is the second point. So first, we look into the technical representation of business subdomain. So looking into a portion of the view or a portion of the system that represents something that is meaningful for the user. Because if you look into a button or any other component, you might understand that I abstract a portion of the system, or whether this portion of the system represent only a technical capability. Then who is really owning how to use that component library is the container of the component. And micro-frontend, in order to be independent, we need to have something that is let's say, encapsulated inside these boundaries. The moment that we are not capable to do that, we will have external dependencies. We will have friction for deployment because we need to coordinate with other teams, and therefore we are in a position to have the worst of both worlds. So you have a bit of distributed system, but is coupled with the rest of the system, and therefore is not going to let's say, provide you the benefit of micro-frontends. And then very often I've seen teams blaming the architecture, or whether they didn't realize that the signals that the architecture was providing to them, they just ignored it. They thought their implementation was perfect, but the architecture was not what they were looking for. The other thing is that is very, let's say, I've read several articles into this topic. Oh, micro-frontends are perfect because you can mix and match React, Angular, Vue, wherever. I disagree with that, despite there is some truth. So technically speaking, you can do exactly the same thing, mixing technologies with single-page application, with server-side rendering, with wherever you want. Would you do that? Probably the answer is no. And the reason being is because you are conscious that there are clashes on the, let's say, thoughts behind frameworks, and there are clashes also for performance, because you know that your customers will have some troubles with that. But there are a certain moment in time that micro-frontends are helping a lot on moving from a monolith architecture or another framework to a new one, and you can start to have the old system and the brand new system with micro-frontends up and running alongside together. You can play with DNS or other, let's say, bit of compute on the edge or other capabilities that are available. Depends from if you're working on-prem, on cloud, etc. But the idea is, with micro-frontends, you can take a portion of the system, ship in production, start to generate value, and that can live alongside the monolithic architecture. In the past, if you remember well, you need to ask to your management, we would need to have 18 months for rewriting the entire system, and you don't know if it's 18 months or 24 or more. And you will find, let's say, you need you will work in stealth mode for several months, and then suddenly big bang deployment, nothing works. Here, instead, we are approaching more iteratively. We know that software is empiric, is not scientific. Therefore, you need to make trials and errors, right? So you start to deploy portions, see what works, what doesn't, you improve, and you work with a constant feedback loop that is helping the developers to move fast. And that's exactly what we want to achieve here. So when you want to migrate, micro-frontends are definitely capable to handle multiple frameworks, technologies, and it's a good practice for generating value for your user, because at the end of the day, that's what we are trying to achieve. The controversial part, minimize the code share. I know what you're thinking, and I heard that several times. I walk even in rooms with 60, 70 developers and engineers blaming me with this idea of micro-frontends. The thing is, distributed systems are hard, and part that is hard is code sharing. Because the more you share, the more you need to create governance in order to maintain this shareability intact and useful. If you think about design system, that is definitely something that you should share in micro-frontends. You need to think to create a governance on maintaining, okay, there is a new version of the design system, how I can enforce for all the micro-frontends to do that. And I share a lot of tricks in my book about that. And also I go very in deep about that. But in reality, you need always understand what's the trade-off, what is shareable and what shouldn't share, or what you can defer to share. Because bear in mind, we are, when you define something, it's not that you write in iron that you need to do in a certain way. You can start in one way and then you can move into, let's say, a more shareable way, if needed, when you have more information that are backing you up in this decision. The other thing is that micro-frontends are owned by a single team. Very often I've seen this concept, everyone can put their hands into the micro-frontends. Yes, technically you can. Would you do that? I don't recommend it, because usually, I want to become a business expert into my domain. I want to take decision on that, because we want to decentralize the decision making towards the team. And therefore, yes, I can open a PR to someone else in order to help them. Maybe they are under fire because they need to deliver a specific feature. But in this way, I can help and create a PR for specific things. But ultimately, is the team owning that feature that should say, yes, I integrate that or not. Why that? Because in reality, they are responsible to look end-to-end to the system. They are building the content, or better, the micro-frontend and the code. They need to test it. They need to operationalize it. And they are responsible if something goes wrong in production. Therefore, if you cannot think that, oh, yes, I'm in distributed system. Now, someone will call me, paging me or wherever it is, because something doesn't work in production. Now, suddenly I need to call another team in order to fix my domain. That doesn't work. You need to be responsible for that. You need to have ownership and understand how the system behaves in production and works end to end. So if you think about visually how you would represent that is, before you have an application, then you start to look into journeys, user journeys, you look into domains, subdomains, call it as you prefer. But the reality is you are looking into portion of the system that could be multiple micro-frontends in one page, or a single experience for the user that could be an example of micro-frontends as well. Now, I want to leave you before we go into the Q&A, so you can ask any question that you want. And I know there are a few that are already coming. The last part that I want to talk about is that those are, let's say, the definition of micro-frontends, why we reach micro-frontends, but there are some other principles we need to take into account. The principle that I was talking before about microservices apply to the front end. The first one is the module around the business domains. I think we discussed extensively about that, so that's fine. Second one is the decentralization. There is no such thing like embracing a distributed system that works in an organization without having the organization that is decentralized. If you still have distributed system, front end, back end, wherever, and you don't align your organization structure to them, it's not going to succeed, wherever you're taking. There is three things I usually say: culture, the organization structure, and the architecture that are tightly coupled. The moment that you change something in one of those three areas, there will be changes or friction into the other two. So you need to look holistically on these things. It's never just a technical decision. The third thing is the culture of automation. There is very often organization or teams that are thinking, oh yeah, I'm just like, I prepare my CI/CD done, and then I forget about that. The reality is it's extremely important that you have a culture of automation. And what I mean by that is when you start to see your micro-frontend pipeline that start to reach like the 7, 8, 10 minutes mark, probably it's time to look back and visualize what you're doing and see if there are opportunities to shift left more capabilities or let's say improving the thing. The reason why is because it's not just for creating predictable artifacts that we are doing that. The main reason is that we want to create a fast feedback loop for developers. We want that they use this stuff in order to create guardrails that will enable the team to work safely. So for instance, if you have like requirements on the security side, if you have requirements on the budget size of micro-frontend, stuff like that, or you want to enforce the design system we mentioned before for a specific version, are usually baked into your pipeline. And therefore, if it's slow, developers will not go through that. And therefore, you are fostering the wrong behaviors inside the trenches. Therefore, it's very important you look into that. Independent deployments, we discuss about that. The moment you find yourself that every single time you need to deploy coordinating the effort with other teams, that's not micro-frontend. That there is some coupling somewhere in the system, so you need to get back to the whiteboard and understand how to untangle that problem. It could happen that sometimes you need to coordinate the deployment, but shouldn't be the day-to-day. Hide implementation details. Probably you have heard about the concept of API first contract, where we define the API and then we start to work in parallel with other teams. That's similar. I unfortunately didn't see many teams in back in the days when I was a developer as well in the front-end world that were talking about that, but it's important that you define the boundaries. So when you have identified the boundaries, you need to understand how they communicate, what are the mechanisms, and how you're going to expose certain things happening in your domain to other domains. And that's a very fundamental part. And last but not least, the failure isolation. There is a dimension that up to now we didn't take into account. If you think about the single page application in the first example, either you download the code or you don't download. And if you download the code, the only thing that could fail is the API code. But here we have a different dimension. So you could have partially the system downloaded by the user inside the browser and partially not. So it's up to you to think, okay, how can I create a nice user experience for my customers? Should I gracefully hide a portion of the UI or should I trigger an error like 500 error or whatever? So those kind of questions should be at the forefront of your thought when you are thinking about that. Yeah, so basically that's what I got. These are few resources that I collected for you in order to share basically more details about micro-frontends. But I'm very happy now to take any question and start to, let's say, answer what you're thinking and if you have any challenge with micro-frontends that you would like to discuss.
Hello again, Luca. So we do have a couple of questions here. The very first one, and it would come from me basically. What do you think about the next biggest challenge in micro-frontends?
Okay, so the biggest challenge. So we have done quite a lot in the last few years, I would say. If I think about how currently I'm seeing the client-side rendering architecture for front-end, we are in a very solid shape. Not for everything, obviously, but definitely we have clear winners over there with module federation, with single SPA, for instance. And And I believe the practices are rock solid. The developer experience has improved drastically. The fact that, for instance, both Module Federation and Single SPA takes care about dependency management is fantastic, because it was a burden at the beginning, back in the days in 2016. There are other, obviously, approaches, but I think client-side rendering-wise, we are in a good shape. There is more to do on the developer experience, but we will touch briefly about that. And on the server-side rendering, there is way more work. There are certain solutions like Module Federation can work with Node, can work with Next, can work with other. But I think there is it's still not as simple as client-side rendering. We need to do more. On that side, is one of the, let's say, goals that I have this year, trying to simplify the let's say, development of server-side rendering micro-frontends. I'm working currently quite a lot in the first few months of the year for solving this challenge on AWS side with serverless. I believe serverless is the perfect paradigm for full stack developers that don't want to go into the drill of all the complexity that the backend usually might have with the networking, scalability, and so on and so forth. I think serverless provides that out of the box, and the vast majority of the projects out there can benefit from using, I don't know, a Lambda function and running their code over there. Now, the interesting thing for me is how to create everything together, because you need to put some thoughts. Last year, and it's a year and a half that I'm talking about that for, let's say, any language and any framework. I created like a reference architecture that is framework agnostic. So the exchanges through HTML fragments, like back in the days Zalando was doing, but in a more modern way, is using serverless. So you pay for what you use. And obviously, if you think the vast majority of the organization has multiple environments, thanks to serverless, the pre-prod environment will basically run only when developers are working, and vast majority of the week, basically, you don't pay for what you don't use. That's great. But I think that will work for many communities, like Java community could benefit from that. I don't know, Go community, Rust community, definitely I see that there is some value. Also the Node.js community. However, with Node, I think we can do better. So currently I'm working on a potential solution for fetching remotely Node.js modules that could be either available in an S3 bucket in case of AWS, or remotely in through HTTP request, and let's say moving closer to a Lambda function, so you don't have every time to compose the UI doing remote fetch or whatever. That obviously adds into your core, adds time and latency into your core web vitals. So definitely there are better ways to do that, and I'm currently working on this, and the first results are pretty promising. I will be able to share more in the next few weeks or months.
And this sharing, are we going to hear from you somewhere about this new?
Totally. I will be very vocal when time comes. There currently, I'm trying with a bunch of solution. I was able to create several POC at the moment. I need to, let's say, gather the metrics. So I have, let's say, in the next couple of weeks, I will start to do load testing and trying to understand through Core Web Vitals how much I can compare a monolithic solution with this approach. But I believe that there will be talks, blog posts, and more coming on your way.
This is great. So if you want to uncover some news, something with the audience, please feel free. Now it's your moment, Luca.
Yes. There is another thing that I'm working on top of this that I am quite pleased, honestly, to share for the first time here. So a month ago, I was reached by O'Reilly, and they asked me if I would be interested to write the second edition of Building Micro-frontends. And I obviously agreed, and therefore I spent the last month looking into, okay, so what's still valid into the book, what we should add, what we should look at. And I found that basically when I started to deep dive into the table of content, I took all the comments that I receive on Amazon or other portals, or personally when they wrote to me, and I started to look, okay, how can I do better? How can I incorporate this thing? So at this stage, the book will cover way more than the first edition, or at least this is in the plan. I'm going to share and reveal way more techniques, and I have a chapter that I want to deeply write on all the architectures that I've seen so far, implemented, and the one that were successful, and the challenges that I have seen now compared to when I started. It was 2019 when I started to write the first book, and released in 2021 because it took a couple of years. I had definitely seen way more micro-frontends architecture. I have definitely explored way more things with customers. I have seen success, the community grew. So it's a completely different landscape since when I wrote that book. And half of that will just need some update, but half of that will be rewritten and augmented with a lot of new concepts and new chapters. Also for I have this idea of a chapter where we are looking at micro-frontends at massive scale, like I was able to see with few customers, with multiple portals that has to be flow into the same experience, with multiple let's say with the friction created by certain teams. So yes, I'm going to really share with you everything that I've learned in the last 5 years or so, of seeing before in my previous company how it ended up with micro-frontends, that by the way is still there and still thriving, and all the other companies that I have helped, and to achieve a solid micro-frontend strategy.
Thank you so much, Luca. I think it's super interesting always to hear stories like the lesson learned, and mostly the mistakes made, what went wrong. This is like very few people share these stories. Yeah. We have some questions, interesting ones, and the very first one is concerning the architecture itself, and I think it's a pretty common approach, and it's about when applying micro-frontend techniques, the strangler peak pattern, to rewrite a legacy system by a small team. What are your thoughts?
Yeah,
what are your thoughts? And just
yeah, the strangler pattern is a good pattern for moving away from a monolith or an old system. You need to apply that smartly, though. So there are different ways. One is more complicated than the other one, but usually, if you have micro-frontends, is likely that you are going to have a CDN somewhere that is serving your files, static files, wherever. And the approach usually taken is, if you do client-side rendering, is the best approach I've seen so far is having a bit of compute near your CDN. In case of CloudFront in AWS, could be Lambda the Edge, but obviously Cloudflare or Fastly or many others, or Akamai are providing similar possibilities. And basically, you intercept the request coming back towards your website, and you just serve a portion of the page, either the old version or the new version. When you want to communicate between the two, you need to call an absolute URL. So it goes again into the flow, and it will basically provide either the new version or the old version. Now, there is a caveat, though, that is related on how you should think about micro-frontends. So if you start to think, okay, I want to create a new micro-frontend and embed inside the old system, that is the hard way, because you have to handle dependencies, communication, complexity, deployment. It becomes a nightmare. Instead, if you define like in routes, so you literally looking into one page, single page, or portion of the pages, up to you how you want to handle, depends how big is your system. You can rely on the DNS thing, and then having this routing part that will enable you to go either one direction or another one. And this approach is simple to test, Simple to gain momentum, because now you are independent, you have a brand new infrastructure, a brand new cluster, whatever you have, and you just redirect towards that thing. And it can happen also on the server-side rendering, because if you have a load balancer, you can say, okay, I want to, let's say, send everything that is / catalog in the new cluster, and instead everything that is in the old world, it will go in the old cluster. So as you can see, if you think on serving or having enough content for sharing a page, or a few of them, or a group of pages, then you can immediately start to use the strangler pattern to move from one place to another one. And you can still use on the micro-frontend side the old APIs. It's not a problem, because at the end, the front end is the easiest way to modernize your system, because you don't have to think about data, you don't have to think APIs. At the end of the day, you can still consume the API in the monolithic world if needed. And then, because at the end, it's just an API that is decoupling your front end with the backend, right? So you still have a lot of leverage. And then maybe in the future, you can start to look into how to move into, I don't know, GraphQL, if you're thinking about that, or having backend for front-end pattern and stuff like that. But the reality is now you have a very simple approach to move into your new system, and you can work only on a portion of the system, generate value for your company as well for your users, and you will be in a very nice place.
Thanks a lot. I guess this answers the question. We have another one, and it's related not about the functionality that we are adding with the code, but stuff like SEO, the page speed, and other business KPIs. Yeah. Should there be a dedicated team who takes care of it, like monitoring?
Yes, that's a good question. So performance is key. There is one thing very often we don't think about micro-frontends. You have some performance out of the box. What I've seen, especially in low-end devices, is that before, when we had a single page application, there is a lot to download, a lot to keep in memory, and obviously my phone probably was faster than some set-top boxes that I worked on. And when we launch Micro-frontends, because you carve out a portion of the system, you don't have to load everything in one go. And that is incredible. We move, for instance, certain performances from 40 seconds to let's say, load the application to 12, just because we split the application in multiple chunks. Now, for answering your questions, the team usually, it depends how you are structured. In my previous company, we had the principal engineers that were tasked to look holistically about the system, and look about performances. I was doing the same as I was VP of architecture, but obviously I designed everything, so I was very close to understand what challenges were facing the different teams and everything. So I was part of that, and there was raising. So for me, it was literally going there using Lighthouse. Or any other tool that you want to use, but for me, it was Lighthouse, seeing a certain, let's say, behaviors of the micro-frontends. One thing that we realized is that the first thing we realized is that we have seen an increase of bundle size for the teams. And one decision we made with the principal engineers was, let's create a guardrail that when you are opening a PR and you want to merge into the main branch, you are going to have a webhook that is triggered. We build on the fly your micro-frontend, either you were using roll-up or webpack, it doesn't matter, and we check that the final artifact is inside a certain threshold. If it wasn't, we block you, and you need to explain why you reach, I don't know, from 30 kilobytes to 100 kilobytes, because it's 3 times bigger. And that helped a lot to enhance the performance of our system. But yes, usually what you have is a team that could be a virtual team. It doesn't have to be a specific team that takes care about that. Another practice I've seen with several customers is that they have what they call the core team or platform team for front-end. That is the one that is taking care about, let's say, creating the glue between micro-frontends and coordinating the activities, maybe creating the first POC, etc. Those teams are in a good spot for handling that. And the reality is they don't have to do everything. They just need to collect the metrics and create a mechanism for other teams to let's say, self-heal their system and look into the metrics. So if every team does that, simultaneously, the system will behave better and will perform better.
Thank you so much. We have another question. and it's related to the infrastructure.
Yeah.
So have you some experience with application of micro-frontend approach in a Kubernetes infrastructure? If yes, do you think some Kubernetes pattern can help in some way?
Yes, so Kubernetes. So I'm not against any containerized solution at all. I have customers that I follow that are using Kubernetes, other are using ECS with Fargate, other are using Lambda. So there is no problem at all. I think there is a caveat, although I tend to when for instance there is a client-side rendering approach, I tend to suggest not using any of compute system because you need to maintain them. It's by far more performant having static files available in an object storage and served by CDN than anything else. However, I realized during the years that there is a certain situation where you really need to have Kubernetes or container, whatever. That is when you are serving these static files into private networks. So if you have, for instance, a financial application that has to be consumed only by people internally, by employees internally, you don't want to expose externally, the only way to do that is through this approach, so using Kubernetes or whatever. So in that case, I believe that has valid things for client-side rendering. For server-side rendering is different. You need some compute somewhere, and I believe Kubernetes, like Fargate or Lambda, are absolutely a valid approach. And if you have a company that has a platform team that is a Kubernetes shop and is building their system, you can have easily your pod with your namespace and build your Micro-frontends approach over there. You will have your web server running your container, and everything will be orchestrated by Kubernetes and absolutely can work without any problem, but like it could work in any other place. So for me, Kubernetes, I tend always to think about everything that is a service like what it is, a tool for expressing something else. So my effort here in the Micro-frontends community is looking holistically on how the things are working and give the right importance to the right thing. I didn't see any benefit from any customer if they were running Kubernetes, if they're running a container in different orchestration system for Micro-frontends. There wasn't something like, for instance, I've seen if you want to use, for instance, I don't know, you want to select a specific GPU because you have very intensive process. Yeah, I can see that Kubernetes would help to select the right, let's say, machine for that. For instance, in Lambda, you cannot at the moment, and therefore I can see the competitive advantage over there. But for Micro-frontends, if you're thinking, oh yeah, I need to use Kubernetes for other reason that is not all my company is using Kubernetes, then you can easily start with something else if you are more comfortable with. But Kubernetes, or as any other, doesn't provide, let's say, a competitive advantage for running Micro-frontends.
Thank you, Luca. We have a question about testing strategy, and I think it wouldn't apply only for Micro-frontends, but in any case, using mock data or contract testing.
Oh, yeah, I have seen not many companies using contract testing. I have to be honest, despite I believe is a valid approach. I have seen currently 2 companies worldwide that have done that, and the first one ditched the approach because they found it too complex, and they moved back to end-to-end end-to-end testing, covering a portion of the system on the critical path, as they call it. And another one instead that is keeping up with that, and they found extremely helpful. I believe, to be honest, that in any type of testing, again, is the maturity of the organization and how much you want to push that will make the difference more than the technicality. What I mean by that is that testing like monorepo versus polyrepo, stuff like that, are not just technical decisions, are organizational one as well. And therefore, whatever you are choosing, we know that technically contract testing works and end-to-end testing works, integration testing works, stuff like that. But it depends how you apply inside the organization. And that part of the culture or engineering culture is up to you to foster properly. And I think is probably the highest challenge compared to the testing strategy you are going to choose.
Wow, it's a deep answer. Thank you, Luca. A question regarding the communication between the teams. So if you have like several teams working on micro-frontends, what should they share? How do they share? How do they communicate?
Okay, makes sense. So here there is a distinction. So if you have multiple teams working on what I call the vertical split, so a page or group of pages, there isn't much that you share. The vast majority of the time, what they share is either ephemeral data through query strings or tokens. Very often, I've seen customers that are, let's say, they share, let's say, a bunch of other data, but you need to ask yourself what should be shared and what can be derived by micro-frontend, because you have one thing that you need to remember. If I'm a user and I go to, I don't know, Amazon.com, just to make an example, I'm not going to see every single page every single time. I'm going to see a subset of them. So in reality, the problem of, oh, I need to, I don't know, share this information because it's vital that everyone has that information straight away. Yeah, but it can be cached, maybe, this information, or it can be retrieved easily from an API call. So don't create problems where they are not, where there aren't, okay? So it's very important that you start simple and you start to, let's say, share further down the line. Because when you have clarity of intent, you know better how to design that thing. So for sharing, usually design system, you share it. Log library, you share it. I challenge every time when there's here on top of design system, I go with components to share, because it depends how complex the components is. Also in my previous company, we were sharing two main things: the video player, because it was extremely complex, and the payment library. Mainly because the payment, I had to enforce the fact that if one part of the system was using the latest version of the PayPal SDK, also the other part of the system should work with in the same way, because otherwise we might risk that we don't collect the money. But for other things, I always be careful to understand if it's really needed, because if you are sharing for the sake that benefit of the two micro-frontends, probably you need to rethink about that. So I tend always to say, okay, let's start first thinking about duplication, what we're losing, what we're gaining, and find the right balance for that. But logs are not changing very often. When you define that, you have a library, you can share easily. Design systems similarly. So it's something that you need to have because you want to have consistency on the UI, but you can enforce very easily. But apart from these two, the communication between micro-frontends should be event-based and not state-based. Very often, teams that are not very familiar with micro-frontends, they create like a global state machine, and then they have their own state machine inside the micro-frontends. That's coupling, for better or worse. And therefore, better to go a level down and look to foundational elements like objects or events, custom events, stuff that are common for everyone independently from the framework, and use that in order to communicate, so you're not going to get friction further down the line. I have seen, let's say, companies, for instance, one thing that I recommend, if your team is familiar with React Stream, use that. But it's not that easy if you're not familiar with it. If there is one team that is familiar with the React Streams and all the rest are not, then you are creating friction. So now I'm not sure anymore that if you're doing a service for your team or a disservice to your team.
Great, but from the hierarchical point of view, so there shouldn't be any hierarchy. There shouldn't be anybody like imposing his or her decision on, for example, selecting the log library.
Yes. So more than imposing, it's it's collaborative, right? So you usually have like community of practices. You have like a bunch of principal or staff engineer, distinguished engineer, whatever, that are coordinating the effort, right? But you tend to share these things because are let's say critical for the vital for the system. Other things, I would take a pinch of salt, because you can end up to very quickly to a very tangled system that is not pleasant to work with. So you need to also to understand what's the impact and what's the governance of what you are sharing. Because if you have a strong governance and is frictionless, it might be a good decision. But I have seen many companies that started with a good intention, but they ended up 6 months later to refactor massively their code and start to create bit more duplication and encapsulation over sharing a ton of stuff.
This is great. I hope we can hear some of these examples in your next book.
Yeah, totally.
Luca,
there will be quite a few of them.
Luca, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you here.
My pleasure.
We hope to have you back here pretty soon, probably even before the book comes out. And we will have many more other great authors here with us in the future. So stay tuned.
Perfect.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.